Before I get into this, I need to clarify what disturbing actually means here, because I don't want you thinking something dangerous just happened. Nothing about Vera Rubin Observatory starting its survey threatens anyone on Earth. What's genuinely disturbing, in the specific way astronomers themselves have used that word, is something quieter and considerably more human-made. A threat to the observatory's own ability to do the job it was built for, coming not from space itself, but from tens of thousands of satellites humanity has been launching into orbit around our own planet. This is the real story of what's actually worrying scientists as Vera Rubin Observatory's historic 10-year survey finally gets underway, why one astronomer has publicly said she's very concerned, and what's actually being done about a problem that has no clean, easy fix. If you want accurate reporting instead of manufactured panic, subscribe now, because this is a genuinely important, ongoing story in modern astronomy. Let's start with what actually happened, because the survey itself represents a real, historic milestone worth understanding properly before getting into the concern surrounding it. On June 30th, 2026, the Vera C Rubin Observatory, a state-of-the-art facility built on a mountain in Chile's Coquimbo region, officially began its legacy survey of space and time, a 10-year mission to systematically photograph the entire visible southern sky, over and over, using the largest digital camera ever built for astronomy. Every 40 seconds throughout the night, for the next decade, that camera is capturing detailed images of the sky, stitching together what NSF official Brian Stone described at the survey's launch as the greatest cosmic movie ever made. The scale of this effort is genuinely difficult to overstate. Within just its first year, the observatory is expected to image more objects than every other visible light observatory in human history combined, logging roughly 10 terabytes of data every single night, the equivalent of 1,000 full-length 4K movies. If a story built on real, verified reporting from CNN, Sky and Telescope, and Space.com, instead of manufactured panic, is the kind of thing you want more of, drop a like on this video right now. It genuinely helps this content reach more people who'd get value out of it. Here's where the genuine concern actually enters the picture, and it's worth understanding exactly why astronomers have been sounding the alarm about this specific issue for years now, well before the survey itself even officially began. Since 2019, when SpaceX launched its first batch of 60 Starlink satellites, the number of bright, low-orbiting communication satellites circling Earth has grown explosively. As of the most recent counts, more than 15,000 of these satellites are currently in orbit, providing global internet access. And that number is expected to keep climbing considerably higher as SpaceX, along with competitors building their own similar satellite networks, continue launching more. Every one of those satellites reflects sunlight as it passes overhead, and Rubin Observatory's own defining strength, an extraordinarily wide field of view combined with exceptional sensitivity to faint light, makes it uniquely vulnerable to exactly that kind of interference. Samantha Lawler, an astronomer at the University of Virginia in Canada, put the concern in blunt, direct terms in comments to Sky and Telescope, stating plainly that she's very concerned about how these satellites will impact Rubin's actual science results. That's not exaggerated alarm from an outside critic. It's a working astronomer directly involved in this field, using genuinely strong language to describe a real, ongoing problem affecting one of the most significant astronomical projects currently underway anywhere in the world. If you found this level of real documented concern as sobering as I did while researching it, drop a comment and let me know. It genuinely helps me figure out what to cover next. It's worth understanding exactly how severe this interference actually is, because the numbers involved are considerably more serious than a minor technical annoyance. According to reporting from the journal Science, unpublished studies examining the problem suggest satellite trails could ruin roughly 1/3 of Rubin's images during certain parts of the night, particularly during twilight hours, when satellites remain illuminated by sunlight, even though the sky above the observatory itself has already gone dark. That's not a small, easily dismissed fraction. 1/3 of the observatory's images being compromised during specific observing windows represents a genuinely significant loss of scientific data, especially for a survey specifically designed to catch fast-moving, fast-changing objects, exactly the kind of targets most likely to be affected by a bright, unexpected streak crossing directly through an image at the wrong moment. Meredith Rawls, a research scientist working directly on Rubin's legacy survey and an astronomer at the University of Washington, has spent years developing the specific techniques needed to identify and filter out these satellite streaks from Rubin's data, work she began well before the observatory's survey ever officially started. Originally developing image processing algorithms for entirely different purposes before the rise of satellite megaconstellations forced her focus to shift. Rawls has offered a useful, more measured way of thinking about the actual severity of the problem, describing satellite streaks as functioning more like bugs on a windshield during a summer night, something that genuinely obscures parts of the view at certain moments, without necessarily ruining the overall drive entirely. That's a meaningfully different framing than outright catastrophe, and it's worth holding on to as we go deeper into exactly what's actually being done to manage the problem. It's worth understanding the specific reason Rubin is especially vulnerable to this kind of interference beyond simply being a telescope pointed at the sky. The observatory's entire scientific design revolves around capturing extremely wide fields of view in each individual exposure, specifically so it can scan the entire visible sky repeatedly within just a few nights. That same wide field of view, the exact feature that makes Rubin so powerful for its intended scientific mission, also means it's considerably more likely than a narrower, more traditional telescope to catch a passing satellite somewhere within any given exposure, simply because there's more sky and therefore more opportunity for a satellite to cross through frame, captured in every single image the observatory takes. There's a specific kind of scientific loss that concerns researchers most directly, and it's worth understanding exactly what's actually at stake beyond simply losing a portion of otherwise usable images. Federica Bianco, an astrophysicist involved with the Rubin project, addressed a particularly worrying scenario directly, explaining that researchers are especially concerned about genuine astronomical phenomena that might only appear in a single exposure, but not in a follow-up image taken shortly after, since Rubin's standard observing strategy generally relies on capturing pairs of images to help confirm that a detected object is real rather than an artifact or error. She specifically referenced an existing, genuine example of exactly this kind of risk, noting there had already been a claimed detection of a gamma-ray burst at an extraordinarily high redshift, corresponding to some of the most distant, earliest events the observatory is capable of detecting at all. A genuinely fragile, fleeting kind of discovery that depends entirely on catching a real astronomical event cleanly, without a satellite streak contaminating the single image where that evidence actually appears. If you found this specific scientific risk as genuinely concerning as I did, drop a comment and let me know. It genuinely helps me figure out what to cover next. It's worth being fair and complete about what's actually being done to address this problem, because astronomers haven't simply been sitting back and accepting the damage as unavoidable. Sarah Greenstreet, the same Anwar Lab astronomer whose team identified the record-breaking fast-spinning asteroid 2025 MN45 during Rubin's commissioning tests, has also been directly involved in developing strategies to reduce satellite interference, explaining that knowing in advance exactly where satellites will be before pointing Rubin at a specific section of sky, even at the cost of sacrificing roughly 10% of total survey. Observing time to build that predictive model could cut the number of main survey fields affected by satellite streaks roughly in half. Researchers have also published detailed simulation studies specifically testing whether Rubin's own observation scheduling software could be adjusted to actively avoid known satellite positions, based on forecasted orbital paths for the tens of thousands of satellites expected to eventually populate low Earth orbit, finding that a reasonably accurate satellite position forecast does allow the observatory's scheduling algorithm to meaningfully reduce, though not entirely eliminate, the number of affected observations. Tony Tyson, the chief scientist of the Rubin Observatory, has pointed toward what may ultimately be the most effective long-term solution, one that doesn't depend purely on clever scheduling or after-the-fact image processing at all. He's described darkening the satellites themselves, physically reducing how much sunlight they reflect back toward Earth, as the real central strategy for genuinely solving this problem, expressing cautious optimism that ongoing collaboration with SpaceX specifically will eventually get there. That collaboration isn't purely theoretical either. The International Astronomical Union has established a dedicated center for the protection of the dark and quiet sky from satellite constellation interference, working directly with satellite operators, policymakers, and regulatory bodies to develop shared standards and practical mitigation strategies. In July of 2024, the National Science Foundation awarded $750,000 specifically to a 3-year project focused on developing better tools for tracking satellite positions and improving predictions of their brightness, a work directly aimed at reducing exactly the kind of interference covered throughout this video. It's worth understanding why this entire situation represents something genuinely new in the history of astronomy, rather than simply another routine technical obstacle observatories have always had to work around. Telescopes have dealt with various forms of interference for as long as astronomy has existed: weather, atmospheric turbulence, light pollution from nearby cities. What makes the satellite mega-constellation problem different is its sheer scale and its trajectory. The current count of roughly 15,000 satellites represents only a fraction of what's actually planned for the coming years, with some projections suggesting the total number of satellites in low Earth orbit could eventually exceed 100,000 as multiple companies and countries continue building out their own competing networks. That means the specific challenge Rubin is grappling with right now, at the very start of its 10-year mission, is realistically expected to grow considerably more severe as that mission continues, rather than staying fixed at its current level or naturally improving on its own without continued, deliberate intervention. It's worth understanding what darkening a satellite actually involves from an engineering standpoint, because it isn't as simple as painting a satellite a different color. SpaceX has already experimented with several approaches on its own Starlink fleet, including special anti-reflective coatings and physical sun visors designed to shield the satellite's most reflective surfaces from direct sunlight during the specific orbital periods when they'd otherwise appear brightest from the ground. The International Astronomical Union has proposed specific brightness guidelines for satellite operators to target, generally recommending satellites stay dim enough to remain invisible to the unaided human eye, a standard that, if consistently met across every company launching these constellations, would meaningfully reduce, though not eliminate, the interference problem facing observatories like Rubin. The challenge is that meeting those guidelines requires genuine engineering trade-offs, adjustments that can affect a satellite's weight, its manufacturing cost, and in some cases, its actual functional performance. Meaning voluntary compliance depends heavily on sustained pressure and cooperation from companies that have no direct financial incentive of their own to prioritize astronomical research over their core communications business. Gary Bernstein, an astronomer at the University of Pennsylvania, offered a broader observation about Rubin's launch that captures something important about the scale of what's actually unfolding here, noting candidly that despite an enormous amount of preparation by the entire Rubin project team, he still expects a genuine period of shock across the broader scientific community simply in learning how to properly work with the sheer, unprecedented volume of information the observatory is about to produce. That comment wasn't specifically about satellites, but it reflects the same underlying reality driving the satellite concern as well. An observatory operating at a genuinely unprecedented scale, encountering genuinely unprecedented challenges, some scientific, some logistical, and some, like the mega constellation problem, rooted in decisions being made by an entirely separate industry that has little direct connection to astronomical research at all. It's worth understanding one specific practical consequence of this interference that carries weight beyond pure scientific curiosity, because Rubin's asteroid hunting capability, one of its most celebrated strengths, is directly exposed to exactly the same satellite problem. Detecting a genuinely hazardous near-Earth asteroid depends on catching a faint, moving point of light against the background sky, cleanly and reliably, often in exactly the kind of twilight observing window where satellite interference has been shown to be most severe. A satellite streak crossing through an image at precisely the wrong moment doesn't just cost researchers a pretty picture. It can mean a genuinely hazardous object goes undetected for another night, another week, or longer, delaying the kind of early warning that planetary defense efforts depend on entirely. That's part of why astronomers working on Rubin's near-Earth object detection program, including Sarah Greenstreet's own team, have treated the satellite avoidance research covered earlier in this video as a genuine priority rather than a secondary concern, since the stakes involved extend beyond simply preserving pretty images of distant galaxies, reaching directly into the observatory's practical ability to protect Earth from potential impact threats. There's also a genuine regulatory gap sitting underneath this entire problem worth understanding, because no binding international law currently governs how bright a satellite is allowed to be, or requires any company to take astronomical interference into account before launching a new constellation at all. Every mitigation effort covered throughout this video, from SpaceX's own experimental darkening techniques to the IAU's voluntary brightness guidelines, exists entirely through negotiation, goodwill, and ongoing collaboration, rather than any kind of enforceable legal requirement. That means the long-term success of these mitigation efforts depends heavily on satellite operators continuing to voluntarily prioritize astronomical concerns alongside their own core business interests, an arrangement that has worked reasonably well so far through genuine, good-faith engagement from companies like SpaceX, but one that leaves astronomers with comparatively little formal leverage if any current or future satellite operator eventually decides. Those voluntary standards aren't worth the added cost or complexity. It's worth situating this specific concern within a broader movement that extends well beyond Rubin Observatory alone, because professional research telescopes aren't the only ones affected by this growing population of bright, low-orbiting satellites. Amateur astronomers, astrophotographers, and even casual stargazers around the world have documented the same basic problem for years, watching satellite trains, long strings of newly launched Starlink satellites still traveling together shortly after deployment, cross directly through what would otherwise be a clear, undisturbed view of the night sky. Advocacy groups focused on preserving genuinely dark skies have raised concerns that extend beyond pure scientific data loss too, pointing to the broader cultural and even philosophical value of an unobstructed night sky. something human beings have observed and found meaning in for the entirety of recorded history, now increasingly interrupted by an artificial, human-made layer of reflected light crossing overhead on a nightly basis. Rubin Observatory's specific struggle with this problem is simply the most scientifically consequential, most well-documented example of a considerably broader tension playing out between the rapid expansion of satellite internet infrastructure and humanity's continued ability to observe and study the universe clearly from the ground. It's worth balancing this entire discussion with an important, genuinely reassuring detail too, because despite everything covered in this video, Rubin's early performance hasn't actually been derailed by the satellite problem in any crippling sense. During its commissioning tests alone, well before its full survey had even officially begun, the observatory still managed to identify over 11,000 new asteroids and log dozens of other new solar system objects, numbers that reflect a telescope still performing at a genuinely remarkable level even while actively contending with satellite interference the entire time. That track record supports Rawls's own bugs on a windshield framing considerably better than it supports any narrative of the observatory being fundamentally crippled by the problem. The concern voiced by researchers like Lawler and Bianco isn't that Rubin can't function at all. It's that the observatory could be doing meaningfully more, catching meaningfully more genuine discoveries, especially the rarest, most fragile single exposure events, if this specific source of interference weren't continuing to grow at the pace it currently is. So, what does all of this actually add up to? Vera Rubin Observatory's historic 10-year survey genuinely did begin on June 30th, 2026, representing one of the most ambitious astronomical projects ever attempted. And the concern surrounding it is genuine, documented, and voiced directly by working astronomers, not manufactured panic invented for a dramatic headline. Satellite megaconstellations, now numbering over 15,000 objects and continuing to grow, threaten to compromise roughly a third of Rubin's images during certain observing windows, with particular risk to fragile single-exposure discoveries like distant gamma-ray bursts and time-sensitive asteroid detections that depend on catching a genuine astronomical event cleanly. Astronomers aren't simply accepting that damage as unavoidable either, actively developing satellite avoidance scheduling algorithms, predictive tracking tools, and direct collaboration with satellite operators aimed at physically darkening future satellites to reduce their reflectivity. There's a genuinely important distinction worth carrying away from this entire story, one that separates real, informed scientific concern from the kind of manufactured alarm a headline like this one might otherwise imply. The astronomers quoted throughout this video aren't predicting the collapse of Rubin's scientific mission. They're doing exactly what responsible researchers are supposed to do when they identify a real growing problem, naming it clearly, quantifying its actual impact, as precisely as the available data allows, and actively building solutions, rather than either downplaying the issue or treating it as an unstoppable, unmanageable catastrophe. That's what genuine scientific concern actually looks like in practice, considerably less dramatic than disturbing, but a great deal more useful and a great deal more honest than a headline built purely to generate alarm. If stories like this, the accurate version rather than manufactured panic, are what you come here for, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because Rubin's 10-year survey has barely started, and this specific tension between astronomy and satellite constellations is a story that's going to keep developing for years to come. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.